Welcome to Hunters and Unicorns, the Sales Leaders Playbook. Today we welcome John Kaplan, founder and president of Force Management. Without any questions and undisputed, the most influential sales training company in the world. In this episode, we understand the source of this power, where did it begin, how it evolved, and how he addressed the need. This is his playbook.
Edition series, the 33 CxOs, we investigate one of the greatest success stories in the history of software sales. 33 CxOs learnt the playbook from one man, John Kaplan, a legacy which stretches back to the late 90s at a company called PTC. They were later reunited at BladeLogic, which was acquired by BMC. What happened next was truly remarkable. These CxOs went on to become the most prolific sales leaders in the software industry. They've raised over 22 billion in VC funding. They contribute to 4% of software turnover globally, 26 unicorns, 8 decacorns, and the companies they drive have a combined valuation of 230 billion. At Hunters and Unicorn, we're revealing their playbook. Welcome to Hunters and Unicorns. I'm Simon Kutis and I'm joined by my co-host Ollie Kune.
Hey everyone.
And it's an absolute honor and privilege to be joined by none other than Mr. John Kaplan. John, welcome.
Thank you guys. How you doing?
Very good, thanks. John, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here. I've enjoyed the series so far.
Great. Well, for our listeners, John Kaplan and Grant Wilson have built, without question, undisputed, the most influential sales training organization in the world, Force Management. So, John, can you just kind of tell us some of the brands and companies that you've worked with?
Well, I'm sure we'll talk about some of them today because a lot of them are friends and family from the PTC days, and then those folks have moved on into most of the people you've had on this series have been customers of ours. So we'll dive into it. I'll tell you the beginnings and some of those companies that helped launched us, and then some of the companies that we're dealing with today. We're really, really blessed and fortunate to work with some of the most elite people and elite companies on the planet.
Well, John, in this interview today, what we really want to understand is the source of that power. Where did it begin? How did it happen? How did it evolve? And how you address the need. And we're going to get to that in a moment, but actually where I really want to start with is just take us right to the beginning, how you got into software sales, take us back to the start.
Yeah, I was working for Xerox Corporation, had my head down and was focused on trying to be a good young leader at one of the best sales companies back in the day, and I got contacted by a guy named Scott Rudy, who is a dear friend of mine and a customer now, and in the recruitment process when he was at PTC, it was an amazing time because I wasn't looking for a change. I was a little frustrated with some things and just struggling a little bit on some areas on future of career, and they just hit me right at the right time, and they did such a good job recruiting, which I'm sure you've heard, which was part of the secret sauce to be able to find people like me and others that you've interviewed. Scott did a great job, and the opportunity was so clear for me. I had been with Xerox for 10 years, and the opportunity was so clear with me, for me, that I was gone in 2 weeks. I gave a 2-week notice, and I made sure I did it the right way or what have you. But I wasn't leaving Xerox. I was sprinting to PTC. That's how unbelievable the opportunity was.
Why was it such a good fit?
Yeah, well, so the product was incredible. It's kind of like one of those moments in time where you see something and you see a product fit, you see a leadership team, you see an undeniable focus on execution and accountability, and it looked a lot more like me than where I was. And that platform, it looked like, could provide me an acceleration with addressable market, and the more I dug into it, I underestimated. I thought it was spectacular in my assessment of the company, and I still underestimated it. It was really, really incredible. I mean, it was the fastest growing software company in the history of the planet. It went from 0 to $1 billion in less than 10 years. The stock split 5 times in 7 years. It was an unbelievable run.
Yeah. And how quickly did you adapt to the new environment that you entered into?
Man, it was adapting's an interesting word. So, I was pretty high on myself. I was a college athlete, and I did really well at Xerox, and I was really confident in my skills. And I went to PTC, and I would tell you the first 6 months I was in just in awe of the environment. So, like, everybody was an A player. Kind of reminded me, when I went to Boise State, was my freshman year. I played football for Boise State, and you come out of high school, you show up, and you're like, well, I'm fast, I'm strong, I'm a good hitter. And you go and you realize that everybody is fast and strong and a good hitter, or what have you. And that was kind of my experience. There was just incredibly smart, talented, committed, wise beyond their years people at PTC when I first got there. So, took me a while, took me about 6 months to find my rhythm. And it was an interesting 6 months. That first 6 months for a lot of people, in the Navy SEALs, they call it ringing the bell. And so you ring the bell and you're out. And a lot of people didn't make it their first 6 months. Mine was a little bit crazier because they hired me to manage. So not only had I ever sold software, haven't sold software before, I wasn't an engineer, still am not. I had never sold software. I didn't really understand manufacturing and manufacturing solutions or what have you. And they hired me to be a manager. So I was managing sellers. And so not only did I have to learn the product, I had to learn the culture. I had to learn how to recruit. I had to learn how to forecast. It was almost like relearning everything. And I will tell you, it's probably the most intense and best 6 months of my entire life. It's like everybody needs that opportunity when you think you're really, really good and you have an opportunity that doesn't become catastrophic for you and your family, to realize that you still have a lot to learn. And it worked out well for me. But the first 6 months, I didn't ring the bell, but I looked out the window and saw the bell a few times.
What changed? How did the tide change for you, John?
Actually, you interviewed one of my mentors, a dear friend of mine today. I don't know if I wouldn't have called him a dear friend when I worked for him, but John McMahon. In my first 6 months, he called me, and I remember it vividly. He called me and he said, "Hey, John, how you doing?" And I'm like, I was struggling, man. I'm struggling to make my forecasts. I'm struggling to recruit. I'm struggling to, do the basic stuff that you had to do as a leader there. And John is you probably got it from your interview process or heard it from people. He's one of the best listeners that I've ever met in my life. Truly one of the best business listeners for sure. And so, he listened to me and he's like, and he said, so what's the problem? And I said, man, I just don't know, I just don't know if I'm, the guy for, to to do it your way or whatever. I can't remember exactly what my words were, and he got a little bit animated with me, and he said, you know, we didn't hire you to be like us. We hired you to be you in our environment, and then basically hung up the phone on me. And it was a really, really incredible, but basically what he was saying was, look, we already vetted you. We understand we know what your potential is. We know what you're capable of. We believe that you can do it here. It's on you now. So go get it done. And I got off the phone. I'm like, it really, truly is on me. And, you know, I had a really, so the first, you know, I think I joined in April. I finished my first kind of partial year, what have you. I turned it around. And then the next year I was the #1 district manager in the company. And that was it for me. I was on my way, and it was probably that conversation with him is like, look, you got to trust the process, dude. Basically, what he was saying was, we already vetted you. Like, we drafted you, we vetted you. If you don't make it, it's on you. And that was really powerful for me.
So how did you bring the two together then? So the environment that you're in with the environment that you're used to, and make it your own at that stage?
Well, for me, I had to go back to, you know, okay, why did they hire me? And I said, well, I'm really, really good at deals and selling. So Xerox was a great company that taught us the art of discovery, I'll call it. So how to understand customers' needs and problems, and then solution map them. So what PTC taught me how to do was a great solution and mapping them through those problems. So I was kind of at mastery level at discovery, and mastery level I thought mastery level at kind of qualification and running a deal or an opportunity. And I was a good recruiter. So for me, what I started to do is I went with my strength, and I said, look, I'm going to help people on opportunities. I don't have to really be the smartest person in the room on the technology. We had really, really smart people like Kirk Colts, and he was my application engineer, and then application engineer manager, and I mean, that dude was a beast. Like, when you say you don't have to be a rocket scientist to do, he was actually a rocket scientist. So I kind of, you know, stayed in my lane. I helped people on opportunities. I helped them get higher. I was good at executive selling. I was good at value propositions. I was good at discovery. And so I helped my sellers there. And then what I did was I just went out and recruited a great team. And like what you heard me say in the beginning of this podcast, like, we're the fastest growing software company on the history of the planet, a faster growth rate than Microsoft. We've gone from 0 to $1 billion in less than 10 years. The stock has split 5 times in 7 years. That was my recruiting pitch. And it's a doggone good one. Like, when people hear that story, they're just like, oh my God, what's there? So getting people's attention from a recruitment perspective and them wanting to join PTC was not hard. Qualifying and making sure that they were the right people to be at PTC was really what I learned and what PTC taught me how to do. So I built a great team. We got great deals. I built a great team. I understood how to train and develop people. So we had great people like Ann Gary and some other folks at PTC with a great training and development program. They did a fantastic job. John and Dick and Mike and Paul and all the leaders of PTC understood that development was really, really powerful. So I developed at the same time. My people developed, and they really had a good methodology for that. So putting those two together, I did what my strengths were, and I brought that to the people that had, you know, really strong product knowledge, and we kind of put those together, and then we killed it. We took off and killed it.
What extremes did you go to recruit, John?
Well, I mean, I was kind of lucky in the beginning because I had just joined, and I thought, what better way to recruit than to tell people my own story? So I told them the story about, you know, being in my office and the phone ringing. And originally it was like a recruiter on behalf of Scott Rudy and his team. And And they kind of caught me at the right time. Like, I don't exactly remember what the circumstances were, but I never took any of those calls from recruiters, back in the day. I have a lot of respect for your industry, but I just didn't. I was happy. I was focused. I didn't want the distraction. I figured if there was an opportunity, I'd go get it myself or what have you. But so I would just tell people, I'm sitting there thinking that I understand the opportunity that's in front of me. And I described it as like being on a racetrack, and I'm racing and I'm in the lead, man. Like, I win all the races that I'm in and I'm way ahead. I got a big lead. And then all of a sudden, I can't remember what that movie is, but the movie with, I can't remember. He's in like on a television show and everybody's watching his life. And he doesn't know he's in a television show.
Truman Show.
Truman Show.
Truman.
Cool.
So all of a sudden, and so all of a sudden, I'm Truman, and I see like a little curtain while I'm racing, and the curtain, there's another track over there, and so I go and I go off my track and I go and I look at this other track, and people are flying around this track, and that's what it was like for me. So I had my head down, I looked up. And so when I recruited, I was never telling anybody, why are you staying there? That's a stupid place to be or what have you. I just described my own experience. You're racing on a track, and then you realize that there's a faster track out there with better athletes and better competition and better opportunities and bigger gold medals. And, I just gave them my own experience, McMahon sitting down with me and telling me that, you'll make 3 times the amount of money that you're making now. Now, some of the risk for you is you got to take this high salary you're getting at Xerox, and we're going to cut it not in half, we're going to cut it by 2/3. And he said, if you're worried about salary and that kind of stuff, this is not the right place for you. Because he called it a meritocracy, and meritocracy is rewarding performance. And, I kind of laugh at that today, but he didn't lie. Like, he undervalued the opportunity that I was. So my point is, sorry for taking so long to do it. I just spoke about my recruitment process because I had just come to the company. I thought, what a better way to explain to people what I just went through, and I wanted them to experience the same thing. And that's a lot of how I recruited. Because if you're not fired up and excited about the opportunity, why should anybody else be? And if you can't explain, what gets you out of bed in the morning and why this opportunity is a great opportunity for you personally. So that's why when I took that later on to all my managers, I'd grab them and I'd say, okay, why PTC? Go. I'd make them stand up and tell me why PTC. And if they couldn't tell me with confidence and conviction, I'd make them go practice it, because if you can't do that, then if you're not excited about what you do, then why would anybody else get excited? And then, Simon, I think some of the things you're talking about that we talked about when I first met you guys, I used to love recruiting. I loved it because I loved, digging into people's stories. And I'd get off an airplane in the old days. You guys probably don't remember this, but you're too young. But we'd have these phone banks. So I'd get off the airplane and I'd walk into walk out of the gate. And everybody gets off. In the old days, everybody got off the airplane and would walk right to their phone bank on the pay phones and call into their voicemail and get their voicemail. What I would do, I'd get my voicemail and then I'd just sit there and hang out. And there's other people like me that are on the phone banks, and I'd listen to them. And there's people that are closing deals. There's people that are arguing about a forecast or whatever. And I literally did this. I'm not sure I definitely recruited some people. I can't put a name on anybody that actually came to PTC, but my philosophy was pretty specific. I'd listen to them. I'd pretend like I was on the phone. Yeah, I was a creeper a little bit. I'm listening to their stories and what they're talking about. And then they get off the phone, and I'd say, hey, my name's John Kaplan. I work for one of the fastest growing software companies on the history of the planet. Like that mantra, I did that all the time. I'd give them my card and I'd say, would you please give me a call? Because I'm sorry, I didn't mean to listen into your conversation, but you sound a lot like us, and I think you'd kill it here. And so people normally would call me back. Now, I had this thing called the rule of 3. And the rule of three for me is no matter who I spoke to, even if they weren't a fit, and I figured out, when I talked to them, they're not a fit in the first, 5 minutes or whatever, I'd always get 3 names from them. And that's what really made, and PTC taught me that. They taught me how to be a great recruiter. I was always getting names. Problem with people out there, they still do it today. They're not actively participating in their own rescue. So like, we weren't really allowed to use recruiters. We had a recruitment firms and stuff but we were encouraged to participate in our own rescue and source for ourselves, and then use the professionals in your industry to really help us, figure out that process and everything. But the sourcing of that, the best sourcing of that came from the men and women that were leading teams. And it was expected too. So if you killed your number at PTC, but you didn't build a tree, what I called the tree, and you didn't build the tree that had a lot of branches of you brought this person in, you brought that person in. For example, Scott Rudy brought me. I never worked for Scott Rudy. I was supposed to work for Scott Rudy, but the company had other plans. They took me and planted me, and I was supposed to be in Grand Rapids, Michigan, working for Scott, and McMahon plucked me and put me in North Carolina, in Charlotte, North Carolina. But he got credit for being a great recruiter, and there were people that didn't even report to people that came to the company that got recruited. And that's a big part of a secret sauce of unicorns, in my opinion, is that everybody understands the mission, and you can't win without bringing on great talent, and everybody's always recruiting. Even today, everybody's always got to be recruiting.
Well, look, if force management ever doesn't work out for you, there's always a space for you here at SOAP, John. We'll welcome you on.
Let's go.
Let's do it. That's yeah. So what was the result of that, John?
The result of recruiting?
Just generally what we're talking about there. Secret sauce.
Well, we had a great run. I mean, at PTC, I had a really, really great run. I worked with, I don't want to leave out any names here on these. I always get leery about that. But Tim Caven's one of my favorite. And, every time I got promoted, he got promoted. And I was like, well, I think what they're actually doing is trying to figure out, they were more interested in Tim than it. So I've said the guy below me kept getting promoted. So they kept having to move me up. And I went on to go into the international side of business. I went on to Frankfurt, Germany. I lived in Germany for about 5 years, beginning running Central Europe, and then doing some other things in Europe, and then getting involved in the operations side, and then the international side of operations for both Europe and Asia. And then Grant and I kind of came back together. We were working together when I was a district manager. He went off to Japan. I went off to Germany. He came back. We started to run the operations of the company, working for Paul Cunningham at the time. And that's when I really learned a lot about, so I was a pretty good sales leader and seller. Grant was phenomenal in operations, one of the best, great seller too, for sure, great seller, but really, really great in operations. And that's where I learned a lot of the effectiveness things that it really takes to run a sales organization from a company perspective, an alignment perspective. And so I was with PTC, I think it's like eight or 9 years. And I was in Europe. My father had passed away in 2001. It started to get me thinking about, I had been there for 5 years in Europe. I was supposed to be there for 2. So that might give you an idea of my effectiveness. I guess I was supposed to get that done in 2 years, but it took me about 5 years to do it. And I just wanted to come home. I wanted my kids to go to high school and, and middle school and high school in the United States. And they had a great experience. They're fluent. They went back to college in Europe at Mannheim University. 2 of my kids did. And so that was a great experience. But, I wanted to come back home, and that was really the how force management got started, is just wanting to come home. PTC was fantastic in allowing me to come home and transition, and Grant transition. We transitioned at the same time. We were running global operations for the company, and they were just wonderful to us. And we made sure that we had our replacements in place, and and that PTC is a customer of ours today. But that's really how force management got started, was just the ability to come home, and kind of started as a lifestyle. I thought it was going to be a lifestyle, replace our corporate income, and then it turned into a kind of a different scenario, which has been really nice.
So just to clarify, did you go out with the intention of this being the next step, or was it kind of a stepping stone, or was it, this is what I'm really passionate about and this is what I want to do from here?
So that's a good question. I'll tell the truth on how this happened. I was on an airplane and I was commuting at an office in London. I was living in Frankfurt and I had to be in London all week. And so I was commuting back and forth from London to Frankfurt. And I was on Lufthansa, and I'm on the plane, the same people on the plane. They're all commuting. We're all doing it every week. So we all, I don't know these people, but you're nodding at people because you see them. And it's dark in the morning, and the lights are on inside, so you can kind of see your reflection in the window, whatever. And I look around the room, I look around the plane, and I'm like, these people look awful. Like, no, I'm serious. I'm like, these people are hating life. Like, they do not like their lives. And I'm like, God, I hope I don't look like that. And I happened to look out of the corner of my eye. I was in the aisle, and I looked out of the corner of my eye, and I could see my reflection. And I'm like, oh my God, I look like that. And so this is a true story. I actually took out a napkin, and I said, one of those cocktail napkins, I got out a pen. I'm like, what's missing on this plane? And what was missing on the plane was passion. Right. And so I wrote down in a circle in the middle of the cocktail napkin, passion. I said, okay, what am I passionate about? And I started to write it down. Well, I'm passionate about my faith. I'm passionate about my wife. I'm passionate about my children. I'm passionate about my ability to create wealth. I'm passionate about my biological family, my mother, my father just passed away, so my mother and my brothers, and I'm passionate about my friends and my community. And then an old proverb, biblical proverb, came to me. And there's a proverb in there. It says, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. And I'm like, what that meant to me was, I might say I'm passionate about all those things, but I'm not focused on any of those things right now. I'm focused on the wealth creation piece. And so I dug into it even farther. I flipped the napkin over and I said, okay, wealth creation. Well, what am I really, really passionate about? And I was really passionate about coaching and developing people. I mean, I did it at PTC. I did it at Xerox. I'm a former athlete, so I understand the importance of that. And I said, okay, well, what am I good at of coaching and developing? And I just started, and actually force management was sketched out on a napkin on the back of Lufthansa. I landed and I called Grant Wilson and I said, it's force management. That's, a lot of people are like, oh, it's Kaplan, so it's forceful, or, and I'm like, no, that's not it. It was Salesforce, so force, sellers. So people have thought like we're military, we're forceful or whatever. It actually came from just a Salesforce. And I called Grant, and it was interesting because it's perfect storm. And Grant had just gone to the funeral of one of our good friends who had committed suicide. And so Grant was all upside down. I'm all upside down, and I got to get back. I got to focus on my family and get back. So my dad, they talk about making a living and making a life. My dad knew how to make a life. He could have made and he did make really great living, but some things happened in my life where my dad focused on his family, me and my brothers and my mom. And so that was resonating for me, and he had just passed away, and I'm like, man, I got to go figure out how to make a life. And I was probably 40 years old at the time, so the timing was just like the perfect storm. Grant was in a perfect storm. I was in a perfect storm. We had just sketched it out on the napkin, and I said, hey, man, I'm coming home, man. Help me get home, and let's go do this thing. And that's what we did. That's how force management got started 18 years ago.
It's a great story. Really, really great story. So you've obviously got this fire in the belly. You're looking for your purpose. What happened next? What was the process of developing your proposition?
Well, I think PTC was a phenomenal springboard. Like, I had no idea. Like when I was there, I knew we were good, and I knew the company was good, and I knew it was, respected and that kind of thing. But I didn't realize how good we were. And the way I realized that was, thinking about some of the principles. So I know your series has been on MEDDIC, right? And so one of the amazing things about MEDDIC is it's the most phenomenal qualification criteria, I think, in the history of business. And that's what it is, though. It is a qualification criteria. And so we were voracious qualifiers. Well, okay, but qualifying against what? So, okay, now we're thinking about force management and qualifying against what? Well, you're qualifying against a great need and a solution mapping to a great need. And so for MEDDIC, great qualification criteria, I want you to think of MEDDIC as like an X-ray. So you get an X-ray, and I like this analogy because it's like an X-ray kind of highlights where you're sick or where the bones are broken. It doesn't necessarily tell you how to close the broken wound or how to fix the wound. So it tells me where my gaps are. So what we did at Force Management is we just kind of took it to the next level, and we thought about what are some of the great things that we were able to do at PTC. And number one, we were able to position a product to a phenomenal need and an addressable market. We had a great focus on who our ideal customers were and our ideal buyers were. And so what Grant and I just did was just operationalize that process of how do you communicate all of that to a customer. So we came up with our first offering was called Command of the Message. And Command of the Message is really about answering the 4 essential questions. What problems do you solve for your customers? How specifically do you solve them? How do you solve them differently or better than anybody else? And where have you done it before? We did that so well at PTC, but a lot of us were unconsciously competent. And companies can't afford to be unconsciously competent. Like, that has to be purposeful. The entire company has to be aligned behind it. So we saw a big area of opportunity there, and we addressed that in the marketplace. And so that's kind of under the guise of when you see kind of those 4 quadrants of what we do, what force management does. We then took that and said, okay, well, how does that operationalize in the sales process? We came up with an offering called Command of the Sale. And Command of the Sale is basically taking that value proposition, the answers to those 4 essential questions, and making sure that the entire team is aligned behind those answers in the way that they operate. So we looked at companies and said, okay, well, what's your sales process? Every company on the planet could tell us what their sales process was. But when we looked at it, 99% of them couldn't tell us what the buying process was. So when we see a sales process today, we expect to see a buying process related to it. A sales process doesn't exist unless a buying process is in place, because everything you do is to serve and solve that buying process. So there were so many challenges. Again, we did that stuff kind of naturally at PTC, but the rest of the world doesn't do that. And so we then looked at who's doing what when, by role, by stage, taking the MEDDIC qualification criteria and putting that in at the stage level. And we were just had great results on helping people accelerate deals, making sure the right resources are in the right place at the right time, and getting people to kind of formalize that process and then be maniacally accountable to it is, really kind of what took off in the marketplace. On the right side of those 4 quadrants is really, the greatest leaders on the planet. They do 2 things really well. They have command of their plan, and they have command of their talent. You look at any great organization, you look at any great leadership team, they can call the ball on their number. They're highly predictable. They know their business inside and out as if it were their business, and they bring great talent to a company. So we came up with 2 offerings called Command of the Plan and Command of the Talent. What we found when we stepped back from that, these 4 quadrants are the exact reason why PTC crushed it, and other elite companies like that crushed it. So we formalized it, operationalized it, and 18 years later, we're killing it in the marketplace with it, because it'll be 18 years after I'm gone and in the ground, it'll still be the 4 critical components of effectiveness for elite companies.
That's that's really, really great insight there, John.
Did I get some good plug in there for force management or what?
Yeah, you did. You know what, John? You absolutely did. But I think there's a lot of value there as well in terms of, these are really key components of what is common in elite companies. So just tell us a little bit more about what the elite companies are doing that others aren't doing so well.
Well, I think right now, man, like when I said those 4 essential questions, what problems do you solve for your customers? How specifically do you solve them? How do you solve them differently or better than anybody else? And where have you done it before? No matter who you are in the world today, your customer has changed. COVID, one of the things about COVID, and I don't want to minimize it in any way. I know there's a lot of different stories out there for people and, personal stories and that kind of stuff. So I don't want to minimize it in any way. But what it did was everybody in the world, in the business world, everybody's boats went down in the harbor at the same time. So everybody in your value chain. So your customers changed. I'm not saying that people didn't kill it during COVID. There's some companies that are killing it, I don't know what the definition of killing it is, but we're doing really, really well during COVID. And I probably shouldn't be using that word. I don't mean to use that loosely, but doing really well. When you look at it, it's because they got really, really close. They had an outside-in mentality versus an inside-out mentality. And so they made it about their customers before they made it about themselves. And so the answers to those 4 essential questions change, and they've changed during COVID. So our customers, even if we had just done an engagement and helped them with the answers to those 4 essential questions, what we found was, like in the 2019, because of COVID, the whole world changed. Those answers changed. And what the most elite companies on the planet, I think, are doing right now is really, really getting close to that. So anybody listening, I would write those 4 essential questions up on a whiteboard right now. Get your executive team in a room, have them answer those questions on a piece of paper, but silently, privately. And for the technical founders and that kind of stuff, slow your roll. You go last when you give your answers, because if you give your answers, everybody's going to say, yeah, what he said or what she said. So what we find is that's a real simple exercise to do. And what you're going to find is there's massive there's not alignment. So what you'll find is, okay, if we're struggling on the executive team answering those 4 essential questions right now, what are the men and women doing that are in the 3-foot conversations that I like to call it the 3-foot conversations with their customers? And if we're not aligned behind that, what are they doing? And so we see elite companies doing that. And I call it an outside-in approach versus an inside-out approach. A lot of people went in COVID and said, let's hunker down, go in a cave, make ourselves safe, see if we got enough wood and enough stuff to eat, and we'll just emerge on the other end of this. I'm really, really proud because I think you talked to one of my good buddies, Carlos De La Torre, and he and his company, they did the exact opposite. In an industry, in an airline industry, that everybody was running for the hills. Everybody was going into a cave and just saying, we got to survive. We got to just hold on to each other and just survive. They came sprinting out of the cave and said, wait a second, our customers have changed. Not the customers themselves and who they were, but what they're doing, what they care about, what they're struggling with, they have changed. And they capitalized on it. We kind of benefited from that because they hired us. But that's one of my favorite. But that's one of my favorite stories because it was not easy for that company to do it. They were in a big. Carlos probably talked to you about it I haven't. In fairness, I don't want people to think I don't listen to yours, but I'm going right after him. You guys had an hour ago or something, so I haven't seen his yet. But I'm sure he talked to you about the courage and conviction and the guts, but they were totally committed to put their customers' problems and challenges first. So Simon, sorry, that was a long-winded answer, But it's the companies that get aligned behind those 4 essential questions right now are the ones who are doing really, really well.
It's the
And how do you get
characters.
aligned? Sorry.
We did it there.
You asked the same question.
Got you guys excited on this topic. Go ahead.
You did. Simon, you ask it better.
I was just going to say, what do you have to do to become aligned?
Yeah, well, you really got to check your ego at the door. You got to make it all about the customer. You then have to have some realistic conversations. So let's break those down. What problems do you solve for your customer? Most people aren't aligned about that, because we could do this, we could do that, we could do this, we could do that. And in COVID times with limited resources for a lot of these companies, no, you can't do all that.
Are you talking about value, John, or are you talking about service? What when you say, what do we do for our customers, what are you talking about?
They're both. It's like, what problems do you solve for your customer? So what that makes you do is answer, what are the customer's biggest problems? And then you got to prioritize those. Well, yeah, this is a problem, but this is the biggest problem. Yeah, but we're really good at this. Okay, that's great that you're really good at this, but your customer is really struggling with this. And so you have to really focus, and again, outside in versus inside out. Okay, now, how specifically do we do that? All right, well, what goods and services do we have? And what do we have to do to our goods and services to actually solve that problem? Are we relevant for that problem? Okay, yes, we are. Okay, so what do we have to do to our products and services to really attach ourselves? There's an old saying that I say, he or she who attaches to the biggest business issue of the customer wins. Every time. Attach yourself to the biggest business issue of the customer. So that's an exercise you have to go through. What is the biggest business issue of the customer? Okay. How specifically do you do that with your goods and services? We talked about that. And then how do you do it differently or better? How are you going to be different than the rest of the world? Not only how are you going to articulate it, but actually how are you going to operate? How is it going to function and provide value? It can't be like in the old days when people were competing against PTC. This actually happened to me one time. I had an executive say to me, hey, John, I love your product. I love your company. And I'm thinking we're going to sign the deal. So I'm sitting there all ready to go with the rep. And we're like, you know, going to have the champagne out or whatever. And the guy, the CEO of the company, a mid-sized manufacturing company, says to me, but we have a problem. And I'm like, okay. And I expect objections, right? So I'm like, okay. And he said, you have a blue screen versus a green screen. And I said, I thought he was kidding. So our graphical user interface was blue, and the competitors that was the incumbent was green. And I actually looked at him and I said, yes, you're right. And he goes, well, that's a problem. And I said, well, why is that a problem? And he goes, because our people they're used to the green screen. And I almost lost my mind. But this really taught me a lot about differentiation. And I said, well, Mr. and Mrs. Customer, it is true that screen, our screen is blue. And now a lot of reps would actually go back to their companies and say, hey, can we change our graphical user? Can we change our GUI to a green screen versus a blue screen? If you did that at PTC, you would have got shot in your head and you would have been dusted off to the curb if you did that. Well, luckily I grabbed myself and I said, hold it, this guy's talking about differentiation and he's talking about decision criteria from MEDDIC. And later on, I would call that required capabilities. And I knew that we had some very specific required capabilities. One of them was a change made anywhere was reflected anywhere in the process. A change made anywhere was reflected everywhere. So if we're working on designs and we're manufacturing molds or what have you, at the same time I change the design, the same time the molds will update. So it was true end-to-end manufacturing with 100% accuracy. So I gathered myself and I said to him, I said, hey, I asked some discovery questions around design through manufacturing. Is that still the biggest concern that you have? Is a change made? And he goes, absolutely. And I said, okay, well, would you put the green screen ahead of that? No, absolutely not. I said, okay. And I went through a couple of other 3 or 4 top differentiators. And where do you think that blue screen or blue screen versus green screen wound up?
At the bottom.
At the bottom. And it was and today I've never forgotten it. So the message for me is, number one, you got to know your differentiators. Number two, you got to know what it does for the customer. So I guarantee you, my competitor, their last straw, their last card was the engineers that are using the product. They're going to freak out, and I want to tell them they're going to freak out about being a green screen versus a blue screen. And you heard from John McMahon earlier in your series, the engineers, many of the engineers, they didn't want to change because they weren't attached to the biggest business issue facing their company. And that's something that we really help them do in the industry. But knowing your differentiation, knowing the value that it creates for the customer, positioning it in the decision criteria, my Lord, like that is really kind of how it all came together for me. And then taking on force management, I didn't want people to just realize that in the moment and get lucky. I kind of felt like I got lucky. Like, you know, I was going to laugh at the CEO, not laugh at him, but laugh with him, and he wasn't laughing. And I could have lost on a differentiator that was not a differentiator. It was a difference, but it was not a differentiator. And that's really what we help companies do at Force Management, is kind of take that to the next level of knowing what the difference is between a difference and a differentiator, and going out and getting credit for it. That's what excellence is today. That's what companies have to do. And when you're in those meetings and you're sitting there talking about it, you got to have that eye. So, okay, that's a differentiator for us. And somebody will go, that doesn't resonate with our customers. Like, what do you mean? It's a difference. Like, we're known for it. It's like, but it doesn't do anything for our customers. And that's what elite companies do. They have that dialogue and that give and take like that. That's what we see people doing today really, really effectively. Put those answers up there about, you know, when I get to after differentiation, I get there on the 4 central questions, you know, proof points. A lot of times people just give me a logo. Well, we do business with Coca-Cola. So what? What's the story? What happened at Coca-Cola? What was the business problem at Coca-Cola? How did your solution map to it better than anybody else? And what was the outcome? And so elite companies, they're telling stories today, true stories, all the way through the return on investment. Instead of just, we have this logo, we have that logo, we have this logo. It doesn't matter. So again, I'm giving you long-winded, I'm kind of a long-winded guy, sorry about that. But that's what we see elite companies doing right now really well.
Yeah. John, just remember, people aren't here to hear us talk. They're here to hear you. So
okay. Okay.
Talk as much as you need to.
So, John, obviously, you know, it's all well and good. The executive team now are bought into this amazing new focus, right? How do you then get the team to buy into that?
Well, it's a really, really good question. You got to do it a number of different ways. You have to do it through leadership. You got to recruit the right way. I think one of the reasons why we did so well at PTC is that we realized that we were in a moment of time. Our leadership team helped us realize that. There was a prize to be captured here. They put together a plan that said, if you do this, we'll achieve this. Basically, if you want to win a gold medal, if you want to reach the summit of Everest, here's exactly what you have to do. And they had a history of doing that over quarter. You know, PTC went 43 straight quarters of never missing their number to Wall Street. That's over 10 years. I'm not sure anybody will ever do that again. But when you're a part of that, you have a lot of trust for the management team that they're putting together a plan for you that's going to lead to victory, because they kept doing it over and over and over again. So that was important. And then at the end of the day, you have to have the tools and processes in place. So you can't just, like these 4 essential questions or whatever, you got to have you have to hire well for people to look at that and go, okay, I trust it and I trust the process. I'm going to go execute against it. If it doesn't work, I'm coming back and telling the company it doesn't work. So I've got a mechanism in place to do that. But I hired the right way, that people are maniacally loyal to trusting the process because the process has proved itself. And then putting the right tools and, like what we did at PTC and what other companies do is that you don't do training and stuff like that. You commit the company to transformation. You change the mindset, the tools, and the processes, and you start looking at tools and you start saying, if this tool doesn't lead to this mission, get rid of it. And you're the company is very, very loyal to the sellers and the selling function because they're not burdening them with things like at PTC. In engineering, there's a term called wasted heat. And wasted heat is when you either over-engineer something or you under-engineer something, you have friction and that kind of stuff. And PTC was constantly looking for that wasted heat and getting rid of it, being loyal to the sales organization and say, if I'm not going to ask you about this, get rid of it. If I'm not going to ask you about this field, and it was before the Salesforce.com days, but if I'm not going to ask you about this in Salesforce, get rid of it. And so bringing that all together, and at the end of the day, when you recruit well, you have at the individual level, it's you in the mirror where you say, okay, I know that I'm in a moment of time. I know that I have a great process in front of me because it's proving to do all this great stuff all around me. At the end of the day, it's me and you, and I'm looking in the mirror. It's me and you, and I have to account to it with a maniacal focus on execution. You put those three things together, and any company can kill it.
Tell us about operating rhythm.
Yeah, so it's really good because, and I want to make sure that when I'm saying all this stuff, it's not just the sales organization. The entire company has to have a cadence and a rhythm. In the United States, we have a team here that wins a lot of championships. They're called in American football. It's called the New England Patriots. You walk into there, and I'm not a huge I'm a Detroit Lion. I'm originally from Detroit, and I'm now down in Charlotte. But I can't talk about those teams in the same light as I can talk about, I don't know if it's Manchester United or whatever you got in the Bundesliga or whatever you guys got going there. It's the same thing. Whoever the perennial winners are, this is the same. It'll translate all over the world. But when you walk into the New England Patriots, they have something on the door that says, do your job. And Belichick, who's the leader, that's the big mantra of his, do your job. Well, that's at the individual level, but it doesn't just mean you do your job. It means that if you do your job, then the system will work. If you do your job, then the ecosystem will work. And that's what happens from an execution perspective and an operations perspective when a management operating rhythm comes, where you're like, okay, what's the cadence? Now, on a Sunday when the New England Patriots play, they walk into the locker room, and I actually saw some, and I can relate to this too. One of the things I loved about athletics is it was structured. I was an individual personality for sure, and probably a little bit more individual than I needed to be a great team player, but that's kind of common. But I do miss walking in. For me, it was Saturdays because it was college. But there was a whiteboard, and it told you where you needed to be. So at 7:30 we're going to eat breakfast or whatever. At 10 we're going to get taped. At 11 we're going to go out on the field, and these people are going to go out first, and then these people are going to go out first. And so there's an operating rhythm that says if we follow this, it's going to lead to victory. So let me break it down to business terms now. Well, operating rhythms are typically around things like, how are we going to look at territories? How are we going to look at accounts? How are we going to look at opportunities? And having an operating rhythm and a cadence. Who's doing what when? And what's the cadence? Well, we're going to do this on a weekly basis. We're going to do this forecasting in this way on an X basis. And then it's the process. And it's that's why people go and take less money in the NFL to go play for the New England Patriots, because of that operating rhythm. That operating rhythm leads to success. And what I love about it is I walk in to a lot of companies and I say, hey, walk me through your operating rhythm. They walk me through the operating rhythm, and I'm like, I know they're not winning championships, so I'm saying, if I go get a team member and I share with them the operating rhythm. This is what you say you do, what's working and what's not working. So what the most elite teams are doing right now, Simon, is they're looking at their operating rhythms and they're like, this is absolutely leading to success. Keep it going. This one, it doesn't appear to be, get rid of it. If we need to add a new one, they're constantly looking at their operating rhythms. And really what it does is it creates a cadence for the masses. You know, I like to go in on Saturdays and just know, you know what? I know I have to perform. I know I have to be at my best. But when I looked up, it was like, okay, everybody's looking at the same operating rhythm. We all got to do our own things that we need to do to prepare for that operating rhythm, and we won championships. At Boise State, it was one of the greatest football programs on the planet today. They're just in a funky part of the country, and they're a really well-known team. And then I went to Bowling Green. I transferred. I finished up at Bowling Green, and we were 20th in the nation my senior year, 11-0. And when I go back and I look at that, I'm like, I benefited from, and then PTC and Xerox, I benefited from being in an operating rhythm that I trusted because it led to great results. I really want to encourage you, for your listeners, everybody listening, when you look at that operating rhythm, if you're not winning championships, you go back and look at that operating rhythm. You say, what's contributing to our championships and what's getting in the way of it? Get rid of the stuff that's not working. Well, it's always the way that we've done it. We've done forecasting at XYZ time or whatever. Well, it ain't working now. Readdress it. And I think what happens to the A players is they look at the operating rhythm, and if you're not winning championships and you don't trust the rhythm, you don't trust the process, that's how you lose A players. They leave. John talked about it in his podcast with you. A players can't stand mediocrity. Can't stand it.
Why do you
they
think,
hate it?
Yeah. Why do you think people aren't addressing those parts of the business or process or operating rhythm that's not going?
That's a really good question, Ali, because I want to give people credit. You know, I want to just give people a break a little bit. You know, this year is a mother. This year's a mother. That translates to, it's a difficult year, man. Like, you know, you might have people that you know, like most of the people listening to this, they know somebody that got sick. And there's a huge percentage of population maybe that knows somebody who knows somebody that's passed away. So like, it's heavy, man. And okay, then we've got lockdowns and we've got all this stuff so we're all getting impacted by it. So we have a lot of noise out there. And I think great leadership teams, Ali, what they do is they help minimize the noise. Let me get your attention. Let me get you focused. Let me get you in a structure that's going to lead to a great outcome. And actually, I'm going to shelter you from the noise with the structure. I actually love structure when it shelters you from the noise. But Ali, you asked a different question. You asked, why doesn't everybody do it? Sometimes it's right in front of your face, Ali, and it's not that you don't know it or understand it, but you need somebody like us or other companies that do what we do to help you kind of do this and put it in front of you. Just like your parents used to do. You know, you got all this stuff going on and your mom and dad pick out, you know, one thing, or your boss does today. They pick out the 17 things I'm worried about. They pick out the one thing that if I just focused on that, I could probably have a great outcome for my problem. It's just a focus thing. And it's hard to focus when the world around you is experiencing chaos. And so the things we've talked about today, now more than ever, I think you got to do these things because they're just not naturally going to occur, especially in difficult times. They are the things that everybody starts to think about later when you should be thinking about them right now. So again, I don't think it's rocket science. I just think it's focus.
Yeah.
How do you know if the problem is the people, the process, or the training?
Yeah. Well, we have, you know, if you look at, I think we might have shared with you assessing the sales organization. What I like to do is I like to just look at the sales organization. I already told you about the 4 essential questions. I like to look at sales process and ask myself some essential questions in each one of those areas, and I can tell you exactly where the problem is. I can tell you whether it's a company problem. I can tell you whether it's an individual problem. I can tell you whether it's a product problem. I can tell you whether it's a customer focus problem. And I think it's just getting a simple way to assess it. So I'll give you some examples. So like I gave you the 4 essential questions on sales messaging. On sales process, does your sales process align to your customer's buying process? Like simple. Just show it to me and let's look. And if it doesn't, what bad things are going to happen? And so I can begin to see whether that's a corporate alignment problem. Okay, let's say it does. Okay, then I look down at the next thing and I say, okay, who's doing what when? And if I see that's in place, who's doing what when, then I see, okay, let me see who's doing it. So now I dig into the individual level and I see how we're measuring what they're doing. And now I can begin to see, okay, I've got a great plan. I've got a great process. We're not executing. When I'm talking about doing the things we're doing, I can zero in at the individual level and see. It's like watching game film for athletics. I call it the eye in the sky doesn't lie. Well, now I can watch the individual in that sales process and know exactly whether or not, is it a training problem? Are they not doing it because they don't understand it? No problem. I can train them on that. Are they not doing it because they don't believe? I call it skill will. Is it a skill problem or is it a will problem? If it's a skill problem, giddy up. Let's go. We can help them with that. I'm not going to help them forever. So if they can't acquire the skill, not everybody can acquire the skill, but if they can acquire the skill, let's keep going. Let's train them. If they can't acquire the skill, then there's a better place for them somewhere else. Doesn't make them a bad person. But then if it's a will problem, it's a behavior problem, I'm really digging in there. I see it a lot, especially right now during these times. There might just be stuff going on for people. I see the processes in place. I see all this other stuff is in place, and we've got individuals that aren't performing. I can dig in there. I think in my mind, I call it the skill-will principle. Is it a skill or a will issue? If it's a will issue, I can dig in very specifically. There's different aspects on the skill-will model. We'll share that with you. But I can go in very specifically and tell whether or not it's a company problem, a training problem, or a people problem, or a process problem. And you constantly got to be doing that. The leader constantly has to be doing that as part of their operating rhythm.
John, have you ever gone into a company and not been able to fix a problem?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Couple different reasons why. Sometimes people just don't want to be honest with themselves. And we can't help them. So when we can't help companies, here's why. It's like if we're a threat for some way. So a lot of times we'll get brought in by board members because we have a great reputation. Some investment houses have made, really good money with us, and we've made really good money with them and the performance in these accounts. So they'll bring us in, and if we don't do that properly, sometimes we look like a threat. They'll be like, well, why do we need this company? We have people inside our company that can do what they do. And so we have to do that. But that's not really the question that you're asking. It's like, what is it about some companies that can thrive with what we're talking about, and where do they struggle? I think a lot of times it's up at the top, especially in some of our startup companies that we work at, and I call it like the crazy founder syndrome. And sometimes, and I'm not being rude, but I call it the crazy founder syndrome because I actually called myself that when we were starting Force Management, that, I was the crazy founder, and Grant, we were the crazy founder. We had ideas and we got frustrated when nobody else could do it. And it's just exactly what we're teaching other companies now. But when you're just not honest with yourself about what you're good at as a company and what you're not good at as a company, when you got a bad culture, and we see that sometimes where you just have a bad culture, and they talk about, I don't know what that saying is, but when a fish starts to stink, it rots from the top. I don't know what the saying is. It translates in all the different.
It rots from the head, I think.
It rots from the head, man. And so like a lot of times we'll be looking at just a bad culture, and it doesn't matter how great we can be with those individuals inside that company. That culture is smelly. And it's because of at the top. And what we wind up doing is, we do our best to try to help people, but we probably will, professionally bow out in some way. We're too busy or what have you. And when the culture's not aligned. So when you're a leadership team and you're not aligned and you don't want to be aligned, and we get into these workshops where you have to have alignment around these 4 essential questions, but we don't have a leader who's responsible for what I call calling the ball, the designated adult in the room. You got a lot of these teams that are like, and this has come up in the last 10 years or so for me, 10, 15 years or so. We want to kind of manage by consensus and that. And I'm all for that. I think I don't like dictators. But at the end of the day, you have to have somebody who's responsible for calling the ball. And I call them the designated adult. And when I walk into organizations and they don't have a designated adult or designated adults, and they can't, the inmates are running the asylum, and there's a lot of that going on there out there right now. Those problems don't typically fix themselves. Other things, when people struggle is and some of the answers to the 4 essential questions that we have, they just got a long way to go in their product. Like, they do not have a solution that fits that problem, and they're trying to make that solution fit that problem. And so they take it like the carpenter, they saw this off, or they add this epoxy or what have you, and they try to stick it back in, and it's just not solving the problem. Again, the answers are in those 4 quadrants. When you have good alignment around those 4 quadrants, we believe you're going to make it, and make it at an elite level. When you don't, you got to close it. But if you don't have a good product, it's hard to close the gap.
Yeah. I think you've answered this question in a lot of the questions that we've asked you separately, but I think going back to the 33 CxOs that we're talking about in this podcast, why do you think that all of those individuals have gone on to become so successful? Obviously, putting aside the fact that most of them have employed force management, but no, on a serious note, what is it that they've done and why they're so special?
Once you're a part of a championship team, it's very hard to go backwards. People do it, but they don't do it willingly. Once you're around A players, once you're around great products, once you're around great leaders, once you're around great cultures, it's very difficult to say to yourself, I'm going to sacrifice that, and I'm going to take more money for less of one of those things that I just said. Like, I would never do that, and they would never do that. So that culture and that performance was so spectacular. And yeah, we were lucky, man. The right place at the right time, but we worked hard. But once you do that, you're not going to go into something that you can't, you're always trying to build it better. That's what we tried to do at Force Management. We didn't want to try to do another PTC. If it was possible, we wanted to do something greater than PTC. And I'm not saying we've done that, but that was our mentality. And when you look at those individuals, those 33 people that you're interviewing, they all have that in common. I think John said it really well. A players can't stand mediocrity. And so what happens is when you look in the mirror and you're not involved with an A player scenario, not just at the person perspective, at the culture perspective, the product perspective, the industry perspective, all those things we've talked about today, you have a tough time. Once you get a bite of that apple, you got a tough time eating something else. Yeah. And some people do, and I don't judge anybody, but most of those people that I went to war with, 15 years ago or what have you, we're all kind of built the same way. Once you get and because a lot of that came from, your response to that came from within. So you have a visceral, emotional connection to that performance and to that legacy. Who wants to go back? Who wants to go backwards? Like, I don't. And I would bet that the majority of if not all of the individuals you've talked to or are going to talk to, they all feel the same way. We don't want to be somebody that performed and created legacy in that environment and then, gets known as, well, those guys are the PTC guys, and they had their heyday and they couldn't do anything else. Like, nothing could be farther from the truth when you look at, I don't know if you've done this, you take a look at the market capitalization of former employees of that company and what they've gone off and done. I don't know what the number is. It could be like 300 billion or something like that. I saw somebody do it one time at one of our reunions that we had. It's shocking. It's astonishing. And they were great people, great individuals, great quality individuals, but they were a part of something that gave us a taste of the apple. And I'm not saying being greedy and it's all got to be about money, but when you're like in that moment in time, you try to keep yourself as close to that moment in time in the future as possible. I don't know if it explains it, but
no, it does. It does. And it's interesting. I think we done the statistics on the 33 that we've spoken about, and it represents 4% of the total turnover globally in software sales. So
that's amazing.
It's incredible.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Just one more question. Sorry, Simon. We're going to be arguing over who's going to ask the next question now. But
I figured you dudes would be looking at your watch right now and go, how do we get this dude off the...
We're trying to keep you on this podcast as long as we can. But no, on a serious note, we are doing a follow-up series, which is to look at the second generation. So this is the generation that has then been involved with one of the 33 or somebody that has been touched by a McMahon PTC playbook.
That's great.
Do you notice any difference? So I suppose the people we're talking about, the likes of Palmer Paul, who's now the CRO at Datadog, who's ex-Jeremy Duggan, Luke Rogers, again, another Jeremy Duggan disciple. But do you see any difference in this next line in generation of CROs?
That's what's amazing to me. That's what's amazing to me is I see very little difference. John was interesting to me. John McMahon was interesting to me. So when I got my international assignment, I walked into Tokyo, Japan, and I actually had people quote to me through a translator, a John McMahon quote. I'm not kidding you. And John was gone. John had already left the company. And I remember going back to my hotel room and saying to myself, that's unbelievable. And the way that they said it, like we were talking about forecast or something, it was something that, I don't know. I don't know if this is attributed to John or whatever, but it's like the excuse department is closed, or like we had a lot of great sayings at PTC. Well, that was one of my favorites. The excuse department is closed. But the fact that people who'd never met John McMahon or Dick Harrison or Mike McGinnis or Paul Cunningham or Grant Wilson, or go through the 33 of the people. But it's like those are, and you think about some of the great cultures and tribes around the world and the way that stories get passed down. And so my father's the Lithuanian, my father, God rest his soul, he's a Lithuanian Jew, and my mother's Irish Catholic. And one of the wonderful things I love about my father's culture is the way that those stories have been passed down for generations, for thousands of years, and not only just passed down, but by the word has been passed down. And so I don't mean to get too dramatic, but that's a lot like what the PTC culture was. Long after John McMahon was gone, long after Dick Harrison and Steve Walski and these people were gone, some of those basic principles around being a voracious qualifier, being a great recruiter, being a great at discovery and aligning what you do to make it relevant, highly differentiated against your competition, those got passed down through generations. And I would venture to say the Jeremy Duggans of the world and the people they took it to another level. Okay, but they'll say, yeah, but it's not. And I didn't come in when John came in. I came in after John, and I worked for John. And so John and Dick and Steve, and they were part of this original, and some of your 33 are part of some of this original, some of the first employees. So I was kind of second generation, if you will. But what I loved about it is the Jeremys of the world and the Tim Cavenses of the world and the, other people that I worked with, they brought it to their own level. So you take that culture, But you have, it's like what John McMahon told me. He said, I didn't hire you to be like us. I hired you to be like you in us, in our culture. And I never forgot it. So now you get these great leaders, these great principles in the present day culture, and then they execute. So that second generation, I'm really looking forward to that series because they took it to another level. And don't just look at stock price or that kind of stuff. Look at, because it won't be the same, right? It was a moment of time. There was market dynamics, competition, and that kind of stuff. But I'm talking about leadership. Like some of those next generation leaders were phenomenal. And they didn't have the benefit of being able to pick up the phone and call John because he was gone. And but so they had to kind of figure it out themselves in their own way of this new culture and what they've done and what they've taken from that and now taken to other companies. I think where you really see it is in the tree that I talked about. Those things got passed down in the tree. You could tell who worked for certain people. This person hired this person, hired this person, this person hired this person. In the NFL, that's highly valued because then when you change teams or whatever, you can put together your coaching staff. And if you have a big family tree, you can easily put together your coaching staff. It's the same thing here. Look at these companies. Yeah. Look at where the Carloses have gone, the Jeffs have gone, the Jeremys have gone. Look at their tree. These new companies, a lot of it's their tree. Now, I don't want to give people the impression that we were an elitist, no ideas from the outside, because my story was exactly that. I was from the outside. They hired me to lead people, and I had never sold software for them. So they weren't elitist on, okay, we're not going to let anybody do that. They brought me in from the outside, and they taught me how to thrive. And I think that's what this next generation of leaders did and what they've done out in the marketplace, and they're still doing it. Because a lot of the old guys, right, and they're not old. McMahon looks freaking younger than me right now, but, they're like the next generation, they're killing it out in the marketplace.
Oh, it is. And, we had an amazing interview with a guy called Luke Rogers, who's now taken on as the new CRO of Instabase. And he's 33. And what he has achieved in his life is just incredible. But he just took the playbook and he just executed it to the word. He put his artistry on it, but he just dedicated his life.
And whose family tree is Luke from?
Jeremy Duggan.
Okay, so that's it. Exactly. And Jeremy's family tree is John McMahon and others.
But he's now 33 to get to that level and to achieve what he's achieved. It just goes to show.
Which tells you a lot about the playbook, actually. So people can come and go. People can come and go. If somebody can pick up a playbook and win, that tells you that playbook was pretty good.
And this is why this podcast makes it so special for us, because the more we can kind of get behind this and kind of showcase the success stories that are out there, the more that it amplifies the success of this process. So,
love it. I like how you guys did this, Simon. Sorry, I know you got a comment, but we would be remiss if we said like, hey, if you weren't part of the PTC, then you can't do this. Like, then you're not in the in crowd or whatever. That's pretty lame. And I hope nobody's listening to this. It's like, well, if I'm not part of the tree, then I can't. This isn't relevant for me or whatever. It's not. Yeah, the tree was powerful, but the playbook that came from the tree is still, it'll be the same playbook, different products and services, different environments and that kind of stuff. But these principles of the playbook, they'll be around after I retire, after the next generation retires. They are long, generational lasting, my opinion.
Yeah.
Sorry, Simon.
I think that the ICE, the recruitment piece is really important here, right? Because I think the ICE criteria, where experience is the last criteria, is probably what's allowed for this to continue to grow with new ideas and new concepts and fresh blood coming through. And as long as they're made of the right stuff, this is absolutely for anyone, because the playbook is absolutely inclusive as long as you are excellent. And
you guys had a great conversation with John McMahon. I watched it a few weeks ago. I don't know when you recorded it, but John talked about that, and he talked about the importance in some of the ingredients that will be generational. He talked about smart people, and there's book smart, there's street smart. You got to have both. He talked about a intellectual. If he didn't, I would have expected him to talk about intellectual curiosity, great listening, people that just hate to fail. They want to be part of a special team, and they want to like a meritocracy. So there are principles of the people, Simon, that you're talking about that are going, that's generational. That's going to be conversations that when your children are watching this podcast and they're taking over and doing your podcast after you guys get so famous, they're going to be talking to great leaders then. And those are going to be the same principles. And I've added a few things, like what I've learned over the years. For me, time management versus energy management. This is really important concept for me today, and I hope it resonates for you and your listeners. Is like, for me, it's about energy management. Like, I wake up in the morning and I believe that what I do for a living, not only does it matter, but I believe that I am the luckiest dude on the planet. I believe I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. And so what that means is my natural resting state is around the topics and things that I do. If I could change anything over the last 25 years, and I do it with my children now, I talk about kind of natural resting states. Where's your natural resting state? What gives you energy and what takes away energy? And I saw it at PTC, where people got really competitive and they're like, no, I can do this. And it's like, hey, it's not about whether you can do it or not. It's whether or not it's a natural resting state for you. And I'm trying to give you insight into recruiting. I know I don't have to do this for you, but for your listeners, this is really big for me. I just had a conversation. We were recruiting somebody yesterday to our company, and I talked about a natural resting state. And we were discussing whether or not what we were going to ask this person to do would give them energy, or would it take energy from them? And it doesn't mean people can't do it. Like, people say, no, I can do it. And they want to prove it to you. I saw this a lot at PTC. They're like, yeah, I can do it. And then they wound up killing themselves. Not literally, but almost. And it's like, if it doesn't give you energy, because energy is renewable, it's sustainable, time is not. And so that is kind of from my PTC days, what I've learned now, and what I tell my children the same thing. You get involved in stuff that gives you energy, and it's like renewable. You can do it forever. That's why when you look at people like a John McMahon or have you, like, you can tell. I get in big trouble if I told you John McMahon's age, but I guarantee you could put him in any carnival around. Does that translate? Do you guys have circuses and carnivals and guess my age or whatever? You'd lose. And it's because he's doing exactly what he's supposed to be doing in his mind. And so I would just encourage people to really do that. Don't fool yourself and say, oh, I want to be a part of this and I can do it, and it sucks the energy out of you. You do it, and you do it performance-wise well, but you'll never do it in a sustainable fashion. And unfortunately, there was a lot of people in my career that I kind of worked with that I really wasn't honest with myself about that, and I burned them up. And they flamed out. And so that is one of the caveats that we really haven't talked about today, is like, you can chase this apple, but make sure you really understand. My father and mother used to tell me, be careful what you ask for. And I really understand what that means now. Make sure that you're in a situation that gives you energy and doesn't suck it out of you.
Yeah.
Amazing. Do you think PTC or BladeLogic will ever happen again?
I didn't even get to tell that story, did I, about BladeLogic and the... Okay, we'll have to do that on another one. But, that's kind of how we started. After John left, he hired us. He was at a couple of other places, but he hired us at BladeLogic, and Mark Cranny hired us at Opsware. And that's kind of how we got our name at Force Management. Is Blade got bought for $1 billion. Opsware got bought for $1 billion by HP. Blade got bought by BMC. And then we went to BMC with John and Dave Achiria, and Dave went from BMC and then he went to MongoDB and we got hired over there. And then Dave went into the investment community and got us a really, really good name in the investment community. So I'm sorry, I wanted to give credit where credit was due as far as how force management kind of became force management. But back to your question, do I believe that another PTC or BladeLogic? Of course I believe it. I absolutely believe it, because what I've said to you does not rest on an individual. It does not rest on a personality. It rests on basic principles. Now, a moment in time, they're rare, and that's why you call them unicorns. A moment in time, a leadership team that does a great job of getting people emotionally committed to the journey. It's going to suck. It's going to be hard. But if you can embrace the suck and you can get to the summit, like, can you picture yourself at the summit? And that's how they recruited me away from Xerox to PTC. I bought into that. And then the third piece of unicorns that I see is that they hire people with that individual makeup that look in the mirror and either love what they see or can't stand what they see, and they remediate it. And so, is that complicated to replicate? I don't know, but it's not complicated for me to understand. So if I can explain it, it can be done. So I do believe that, we will see another PTC again. We will continually see unicorns, but mostly it's because people see those three things. They realize there's a moment of time. We have to lead. We have to point out where this journey is going to take you, and people are going to say, the journey, the gold medal is so much greater than the suck of getting there. I'm not using the right words, but that's what great leadership teams do. And then they hire people that have that individual component that says, like, I want to be so loyal, like a Scott Rudy that continues to recruit me, even though John McMahon tells him that you're not going to manage him. He was so loyal to the cause of bringing in good people to the company, regardless of not whether they worked for him. He wanted me to work for him, but at that individual kind of accountability level, that's hiring. And so, yeah, I do believe it can be done.
We always ask this question. It's one of our final, second to last questions that we ask. And you spoke about it, early on in the interview, which is, finding time outside of work, especially for your family, especially for people around you. It's important to switch off. How do you switch off, John? What takes you away from work?
Well, you're actually looking at somebody that, has had problems over his life of not doing that very well in the past, and I've suffered from it. And I'm not ashamed to say it. Like, I've fallen on my face before in life without realizing how important that is. What you're speaking about is balance, and people can talk about it, and not everybody's honest about it. But the healthiest people on the planet, the people that are most balanced on the planet, they actually, and successful, when I really look into it, they have this concept that I call flow. It is a state of being where you lose yourself. Some of people can get it in work. So some people, can you imagine where you have that flow state where you absolutely lose yourself? You get great satisfaction from it. It fuels your energy. It gives you energy. And you do it for a living. Holy smokes. Like, those are the smartest people on the planet. So now I've had to learn this the hard way. I've gotten in trouble before with, stress and that kind of stuff. And I was introduced to this concept of flow. And I'll tell you, like, for me, I love it. And by the way, it also challenges the brain. So it's got to be learning something new. So I'll just make it short. Like, 4 years ago, I always wanted to be a drummer, man. Like, I played the song flute as a kid and that kind of stuff. And I always talk about, I play the air drums. My kids drive me. My kids are all grown now. But my children 3 years ago bought me a set of drums. And I lost my mind. Like, and and because they knew I always wanted to do it, and I probably wouldn't spend the money on it, whatever. So they bought me a set of drums, and I went in all in, like, and I learned, and I had to learn how to hold the sticks. I'm not a great drummer today, but let me give you an example of what flow does. What flow does for me is I go into my room where I have my drums, and I can disappear for 3 or 4 hours and feel like it was 20 minutes. And it's challenging, so the brain gets challenged, and I'm learning new things and trying to create mastery. I'm not mastery. I'm junior apprentice right now. And another example for me is 5 years ago, I took up fishing. And anybody that knows me knows that I go all in, man. Like, when I start learning something and I go all in, and people get mad at me. John goes out with me, and he gets mad because, like, I tell him, we got the whole ocean. Go to the bathroom in the ocean. Pee in the ocean. He always wants me to go back to the dock and use the bathroom. I'm like, no. And we've been out there for like 8 hours, and I feel like we've been out there for like 2 hours. And he's like, hey, John, are we going to eat today? And so anyways, those two things for me, and the concept of that. So I like to look for things that I want to learn that are going to be hard. But when I do them and I'm pursuing them, I lose myself in them. And I have noticed that, stress, anxiety, worry, health, sleep, all of those things, when I'm in and pursuing those flow states, I think that's where great lives happen. That's where a great life happens. Sorry, I didn't mean to get philosophical on you, but
no,
I actually spend a lot of time talking to people about that today, because I can tell people, like, I can give you some specific examples of where Kaplan fell on his face. Yeah. And if I had to do over again, I wish I knew what that was when I was, 25 years old.
Yeah, I've just finished listening to a book called Stealing Fire, which talks exactly about this, which is obviously getting in a state of flow.
Is that a good one?
It's really good.
Okay, good. Thank you. I've heard of it before, and now I'm going to get it.
It gets a little bit wild because it kind of looks into kind of microdosing and stuff like that. But yeah, it's a very, very powerful book.
Awesome.
I'll definitely recommend anybody listening or reading.
Awesome. I'm on it.
So the final question we asked John is, does the hunter make the unicorn?
Yeah, I've heard you ask that question. Does the hunter make the unicorn? And I would say it depends. But a lot of the things that we were talking about it really revolves around that tree and the seeds of the tree, the planting of the tree. But without if a hunter knows how to hunt, let's just put it a different way. Maybe you can link this to whenever you guys release this or whatever. I like to talk about the hunter and zoologist, because some companies are like, oh, you've got to have this. And there's this one company in marketing, Martech, and the CEO was telling me, John, I've got to get rid of all my sellers. And I'm like, okay, like I'm having a conversation with CEO. I'm like, okay, but that's going to be a little rough. Why? And it's like, because they don't have the right experience. They need to have advertising agency experience and that kind of stuff. And I'm like, okay, well, I already knew the answer to this. And I said, well, who's your number one rep? And they're like, well, Susie is. And I'm like, no, that's actually not who your number one rep is. You mean like by performance, right? And the guy's like, yeah. And I said, no, that's not who your number one rep is. Okay, well, it's Sam. Nope. And it was amazing to me because it took this person 3 guesses to figure out who the number one rep was. And then I explained to them, actually, the number one rep was somebody that came from outside the industry, but they had learned the playbook or a playbook. And here's my answer on hunters and unicorns. They come together. The hunter has certain characteristics. All they need to know is where the bear sleeps, what the bear eats, how the bear moves. They don't need your help with grabbing a gun, loading it, and shooting that bear between the eyes. And this CEO is looking at me like, what are you talking about? And I said, hey, look, can't you teach the hunter about the bear? And I introduced him to the concept of the zoologist. And the problem was this guy was going to go hire a bunch of zoologists. We know where the bear works or where the bear sleeps, where the bear eats, how the bear moves, but they can't pull the trigger. And that zoologist is never going to be a hunter. And so my long-winded answer back to you, Simon, is it's where the hunter and the zoologist come together. Well, what does the zoologist have? All the information about the bear, all the information about the marketplace, all the information about the products, all the information about what problems we solve, how specifically we solve them, how we solve them differently or better, and where we've done it before. You can go get a hunter, teach them that, or give them that playbook, and you're shooting bear every day. So that's my answer to you of where these come together. Does that make sense?
It has to be one of the best answers we've heard for that one.
Okay, good. I was hoping it translated, but a hunter without the zoology playbook is lost. They're starving.
Love it. Absolutely brilliant. First class. So, John, this is normally when I come up with something really smart and something really insightful to kind of reflect on everything we've heard, right? But I think today, we've heard so much.
You're just worn out, dude. I just wore you out, dude.
No, I don't even believe that I'm going to start to do any credit to the amount that we've actually taken today. But I do, I suppose, want to just hone in on one of the things that you said, and I think it's really fundamental, and it's not necessarily framing the whole series, but I think that moment in time for you personally, which was sitting in that aeroplane, reflecting on what's important, sitting down with that piece of paper and just working out what is it that stokes my fire, what is it that's important to me, and actually is what I'm doing important. I think that's what I want to grab and take away and really highlight as the kind of finishing note for today. But
well done.
We've heard some amazing things, and I'm sure our listeners have taken lots from it. And John, it's been an absolute privilege and honor. And thank you so much for taking the time speaking with us.
My privilege and honor too, as well. I just have one ask. Ollie, I want my picture next to John McMahon over there. But he's got to do an updated picture. That's from like 100 years ago. So I'll give you mine from 15 years ago. But I want my picture next to John.
John, I'm going to put your picture in my wallet.
Hey, you guys keep doing what you're doing, man. I love it. I love hearing the stories of the next generation and friends of mine. Everybody's got a story. My dad used to say everybody's got a story, and I think you're doing a great job giving people a platform to share it, and I really, really enjoy it. Well done, guys.
Oh, well, thank you so much, John. Really do appreciate your time, mate.
Bye-bye.